All right, hello. This is Woke Wednesday number 1. Just want to talk about some of the goals I have for this series and why I'm doing it in the first place. So, I mean, I assume anyone who sees this has a little bit of familiarity with my background. I played comp Splatoon for, I played it since January 2023 up until like September 2025, maybe like June. I forget roughly then. So I have like about 2 years of experience um with competitive Splatoon, and I used to make like a bunch of I used to make some content for it too, like analysis videos and commentary and things like that, right? But I kind of fell out of the loop with competing. I started college, or I went back to college rather. I was in a gap year, and in that gap year, or when I went back to college, like during the gap year, I had a bunch of time, and when I went back to university, back to school, I started not having that much time to do competition, and I was also just kind of like falling out of passion with it. And it got less and less interesting. I still have a bunch of VODs and a few videos on my channel if you want to check those out, but they're going to be a little bit outdated and they're not really relevant to what I'm doing now. But basically, what sparked my return to, the whole content creation scene was that I wanted to keep making content. That's the thing. Like, I still want to make content. I'm a big fan of making content. I just kind of fell out of passion with competing, and I didn't want to make content about competing. So what did I get up to in the meantime? Well, that's kind of what this is. So over time, I got like increasingly involved with like politics, and I know that's like a scary like topic. I know this concept is, I mean, it's stressful. I feel like a lot of us like open the news and then it's like, oh, which like civilization is like dying now, or like, it's never fun, And in my efforts to try to, well, for me, my experience with politics was that it was always a very complicated thing that I didn't have a good grasp on, but I had always believed that like, we should be trying our best to like, create like good systems so that people end up don't getting hurt, or end up not getting hurt. People get agency, people get respect, people have opportunity. That's kind of like where I saw it, and especially like in middle school or like high school, as I started like having a lot of like queer like friends, acquaintances, and just got like more exposure to just like the queer community, and to eventually until I figured out for myself that I was queer. I always like had this like strong sense of empathy that was like, yo, this kind of the stuff that's going on in the government right now with all the gay stuff is like, it's not working out well. Like, they're like banning like, or they're making it hard for like gay people to exist and shit like that. And so that was kind of my perspective in like middle school. And that's kind of how it always was until a little bit more recently. Like a couple months ago, I started getting way more politically involved. Started taking a few political science classes, and started reading some political theory myself. And now I'm at a point where I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on these concepts, but I know that a lot of other people don't. Right, and I'm not just saying that to like be like, oh, I'm so smart and nobody knows anything. That's not the point. I like the way I see it, everybody should have at least like a bare standard like political education, and I want to try to help fill that gap. Obviously, with my bias, I am a leftist, which if you don't know what that is, we'll talk about it. But yeah, so this first stream here, what I wanted to talk about was just defining a few different a few different common political ideologies. And so the ones that we're going to be looking at today are going to be conservatism, liberalism, and socialism. And all of these ideologies are they kind of all hate each other. But let's start off with conservatism. So let me pull up my notes because there's a lot of content to go through. Oh my gosh, it's going to be so hard to do this while playing the game. But basically, conservatism is this idea of, like preserving tradition, right? So you got like, let's say you got like a cultural tradition that you've been doing for hundreds of years. Conservative belief would be like to try to preserve that like for as long as possible, and to try to, well, yeah, to try to preserve it, you know. So, that's the big thing. It's all about preservation. Like if it don't, or how's that saying go? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's basically kind of the idea behind it, at least in my perspective. It's very traditionalist, so it's prioritizing tradition, and in that includes religion. So American conservatism looks pretty different than, like, I don't know, Mexican conservatism, although there are similarities. But you would see stuff like in the American context, you would see lawmakers that would like try to see the preservation of like gender roles and religion, and there's this mindset that human nature is inherently like evil or bad, and that it needs to like and that it can't really be trusted. So it kind of works like on that fear. You can kind of see that with some policies that have been like passing lately, with like trying to like get the 10 Commandments like posted up in children's classrooms, or teaching like Bible phrases, or not phrases, like Bible quotes, or what is it called? Like the phrases, but they're not phrases. The verse, like teaching Bible verses in classrooms. Those would be like of the conservative ideology. And of that, conservatives. Oh, I got 4 stars. Let's go. Of that, conservatives end up voting Republican. In America, of course, we have a 2-party system. And that 2-party system is going to consist of the Republican Party, otherwise known as the GOP or the Grand Old Party, and the Democratic Party. There's going to be like the mule and the donkey and the elephant. Those are going to be the 2 main parties, and conservatives are pretty much only ever going to vote Republican unless there's like I don't know. That's a bad way to phrase it. Conservatives tend to vote Republican. That's the best way to phrase it. Moving on from that, we have liberalism. So liberalism is a little bit more complicated because there's kind of one type of liberal might vote one way, whereas a different type of liberal would vote a very different way. And historically, liberalism, or we'll talk about 2 different types of liberalism. We'll look at classical liberalism and we'll look at progressive liberalism. So classical liberalism was basically a historical response to conservatism. Within conservatism, you would see some kind of problems with like hierarchy and inequality, and like just like not, it would be like a little bit repressive, right? Like this isn't more of a historic example, although maybe it is, but that a conservative, according to ideology, would be like less, would have a less favorable view upon like a queer person, for example. Queerness, of course, having always like existed, but not within the mainstream. Being put in the mainstream, it would be something that conservatives would disagree with because it breaks the traditional gender roles and social norms. So that would be one example for liberalism to kind of come to be. Of course, that's a more recent thing. Historically, I wouldn't be able to point you exactly what, but classical liberalism basically is this idea of expanding individual liberties like to the maximum. And at face value, that honestly doesn't sound like a bad idea. There's this ooh, shoot, that was horrible. There's this kind of like idea of like having a small government with very little regulation and trying to and letting the market work out or sort itself out. There's this concept of the invisible hand where the best businesses will get pushed out of business and the best ones will survive. So it's kind of like a Darwinism or Darwinistic mindset. And this from compared to conservatism, I would say is a step up. Like conservatism is very conservatives have a lot of hate in their hearts is the best way to put it, and that hate ends up doing a lot of material harm. Classical liberalism on the surface is better, but with the lack of regulation and with and the focus on protecting individual liberties, you get this idea of private property. And I want to expand on this idea of private property, because private property at first, or at face value, it might sound like, oh, private property is, it's my iPhone, it's my home, it's my car, right? I feel like that's kind of like the assumption, or that's what it sounds like, right? That's not necessarily what that means under this context, right? Like, even in a feudal society where you're like a serf under a king, you would still have like your own clothes. Maybe you wouldn't have that much because feudalism sucks, but you would still have your own personal property, which would be different than private property. And when I say private property, what I'm talking about is business, and what I'm talking about is capital. I'm talking about like industry and production. So under liberalism, you have the rights to private property. You can open up your own small business and you can watch it grow into an empire until you're fucking Amazon and destroying unions and killing your workers because they took 2 minutes too long to get back from the break. But yeah, so that's classical liberalism. It's otherwise known as being a libertarian. You advocate for a small market. You have the concept of the invisible hand that manipulates the market, and you have a free market with free enterprise. And classical liberals or libertarians tend to vote Republican as well. The Republican Party has a bigger emphasis on small government, trying to keep it small, and less government regulations on industry, to try to let the market like flourish as much as possible. I think if you are alive right now, you can kind of see the faults of it. Like everything is expensive, and every single industry is an oligopoly of some kind that's only getting worse and worse as more corporations like merge, like, and it decreases market competition. Oh, that's another thing. I forgot to mention that. Classical liberalism kind of sees capitalism as like the best like mode of production, where competition is what drives industry to be produced and maintained, basically. And while there is a little bit of truth to that, like, don't get me wrong, capitalism is still like miles better than feudalism, but there's definitely some shortcomings for sure. Let's see. But I mean, yeah, it's just what I said earlier. Like, what I see is that in the beginning, you could probably have a lot of market competition, but over time, as businesses start getting defeated, as they start to kind of buy each other out, which is realistically what you see more of. Oh damn, that was nice. the market competition starts going away. And that competition is really important for liberalism because without it, corporations can kind of do whatever you want. Like let's say Amazon has a monopoly, which over um what is it? Like online, not online markets, but within online commerce and delivery, they kind of do have a monopoly. There's not really anybody that's like competing directly with Amazon other than like very small businesses who are independent. And you kind of see that like as market competition like goes away, you see less opportunity to join the market yourself. Damn, that was nice. If you like, let's say you take out a loan to start a business and you want to do like a fucking e-commerce business, just like Amazon, because they have a monopoly over the market and they basically have unlimited or they have all of the customers within the market. They can manipulate their prices to price you out of the market until you eventually either go bankrupt from your inability to compete with them, or till where you do succeed, but you end up getting bought out because under capitalism and under the market competition, the best way to beat your opponents is to just buy them. You know, the point of capitalism is to accumulate as much capital as possible, to accumulate as much money as possible, and you do that by getting capital. Oh my god. So there's a lot of problems with it, and while there is something to be said about the inequality it produces, it is worth mentioning that capitalism itself does build industry. Now, I'm not saying that within that industry there isn't inequality or prejudice or discrimination, which historically there always has been. Like, just look at the American slave trade. That was the most egregious example. But it was for the benefit of capital. Oh my god. And in response to classical liberalism, you have progressive liberalism. Now this is where we start to get to a little bit more ball. There's still some issues with it, but the idea is that it recognizes the shortcomings of classical liberalism, right? If you try to maximize the needs of the individual, you know, you try to have the most deregulated market ever, eventually things turn into monopolies, oligopolies, and the market sucks, everything's expensive, and nobody can afford to live, right? And so progressive liberalism recognizes that and is like, okay, this does suck. And what progressive liberals will say is that the solution to doing that is in regulation, government regulation. So whereas classical liberals believe in the invisible hand in the free market, progressive liberals believe in more regulation, at least in theory, to where corporations can't just walk all over everybody with the mass amounts of wealth that they accumulate, and with the ability to drive competitors out of the market or absorb them completely, which honestly happens like a lot more. Don't quote me on that. But progressive liberals, they kind of are proponents of this idea of capitalism with a safety net, or like a social democracy. So, but you kind of see that, where you see that would be in like early 1900s America, during the FDR era of policy, where you have a lot of, oh my gosh, you have a lot of social safety nets. You have a robust welfare system, easier access to things like transportation, food, housing, healthcare, water, all of these things that people need to live. The goal is to try to decommodify some of the markets that have inelastic demand, like inelastic demand being a demand where you can't really bargain or what is it, like barter for the price, right? Like if you need a life-saving like surgery and it's going to put you in bankruptcy, or it's going to bankrupt you to get this procedure, you're obviously going to prefer that over dying, right? It's got inelastic demand. So progressive liberals are like, okay, I see this. We should try to nationalize the industry and have it be ran by the government so that people aren't going, bankrupt just trying to stay alive, right? And you see this in the Scandinavian model, like countries like Sweden, Norway, Denmark, a couple other countries in Europe. I think Germany is one of them too, where you see these safety nets, these social programs, these strong welfare systems that give people more opportunity by increasing taxes in order to fund these programs. And so the idea is that if you just tax everyone directly rather than going through a middleman of like insurance or a private business, then you can fund these initiatives without having to worry about like profit or labor exploitation or anything like that. You can kind of just do it. A problem with this is that while it is better than like libertarianism, there's still a few problems. Domestically, it's pretty good, but there's still an inequality. While some industries, the more the more important ones, I would probably argue, like your water supplies and your healthcare systems, while those would be like nationalized under like a social democracy, it still functions under the basis of capitalism, which capitalism is beholden to all of the problems that we've already talked about before, but then also international problems, right? So there's a lot of exploitation of the third world under capitalism that exists in practice. Like if you want to have this social democracy and you want to keep this level of hierarchy, this level of wealth for the owning class in your own country, they need to have somebody to exploit in order to keep that wealth, to keep that margin of wealth at least. And this is where the exploitation of the third world happens, right? In South America, there was like this banana company that was like paying like South American farmers like, I don't know, a couple dollars a day for work or something like that. I'll try to find the source on that because I don't want to just be talking out of my ass, but that is a real thing. And that's kind of that's the biggest problem with capitalism, is that it's a system that demands never-ending growth, and obviously you can't do that. Like eventually you run out of markets to conquer, you run out of industry to build. You just can't expand forever. That's not sustainable. There's also one more contradiction. So under capitalism, the way that industry works is that you have the capital owner, and then you have the working class. So the two class relations under capitalism are going to be, and these are going to be Marxist terms, it's going to be the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. So Karl Marx in the 1800s, he was an academic that wrote a whole lot about how much capitalism sucks. But not in just like a theoretical application. Well, I mean, it was all theory, but it was a material analysis. He developed this method of analysis called dialectical materialism, which that whole method of analysis is way more complicated than what we have time for today. That would probably deserve its very own stream. What Marx basically introduces is a class analysis and a material analysis. So under capitalism, you are either a worker or you are a owner, right? If you are a capitalist and you own capital, you make money based off of the profit that your business produces, right? That's how business works. And if you are a laborer, then you trade your labor time for a wage. That is the class relationship. You as the proletariat, you trade your labor for a wage, and you as the capitalist, you own the capital and you profit off of the ownership, off of the industry, the business that it produces. Oh my god, please leave me alone. Nice. And this leads us to the concept of surplus value. So the way that surplus value works is, let's say you work at fucking McDonald's, right? And let's say you put in an 8-hour work shift, you make, just for the sake of the hypothetical and easy numbers, let's say you make $10 an hour. In 8 hours, making $10 an hour, you would make $80. And so that would be your wage. But throughout your 8-hour shift, you're probably going to be producing... Oh, nice. During your 8-hour shift, you could be producing much more than just $80 worth of value, right? Me personally, I work retail right now. I have sold the amount of product within one transaction that is more than my entire paycheck, right? Because I make a wage. Oh, is my Switch audio not working? Hello? Hold on, let's figure this out. Give me 1 second. Why is this not working? That didn't do it. It was working earlier. What happened? Okay, now the audio should be doubled, which is not what I want. Was that doing it? No, that didn't do it. What is going on? All my wires are plugged in and shit. Ah, fuck it. I can't care enough about this. I'll fix it some other time. Okay, where was I? Surplus value. Okay. Oh, wait. What happened to my stream? Hello? Come back? Okay, I literally just had to unplug it and replug it. I didn't know it was like that for so long. Fuck. Okay, we're back. Okay, let's talk about surplus value. I wanna bring up an image. So let's say you sell $300 worth of burgers at your time of McDonald's. This image will work. During your 8-hour shift, you get paid $10 an hour. So you don't have ownership over your labor, right? So and you don't have ownership over the capital, which means that even if you made $3,000, you could have made $1 million. You're still getting paid $80 because that is your wage. That is your relationship with the capitalist. And that is the inherent contradiction within capitalism that Marx describes. It's called the theory of surplus value. Let me grab an image. Because the capitalist could theoretically work like 0 hours, and just by having ownership over the capital is entitled to the profit. There we go. Okay, I don't know where this is from. But here we go. This is an image that kind of explains the relationship. So your 8-hour workday, let's say it's $80, and you have the value that you generate, right? Of the entire time that you work generating value, you are only compensated with your wage of the amount of time that you work, depending on what your wage is, regardless of how much surplus labor time you provide. So the capitalist gets to take whatever you generate just based off of ownership. And that is the problem with capitalism. So what's the solution? What is the solution? Well, I'm gonna stop playing X. That was a bad idea. Steam Rainmaker. The solution is socialism. Now, socialism is a word that is like heavily stigmatized in the United States, right? You hear socialist and you're like, oh, that's evil. I killed a million bajillion people in my iPhone and whatever the fuck, right? Socialism is a mode of political and economic model in which democracy is expanded to the workplace. That's how I like to describe it, right? There's common ownership over the mode of production through the community and workers. Community being probably a later stage, but the way that Marx describes it is that socialism is not the antithesis to capitalism. They're not opposites, right? Whereas capital describes private ownership over capital, thus it being the reason why it's called capitalism. Socialism advocates for worker ownership, common ownership, right? Instead of having your boss telling you what to do and then you just show up for your wage, you're able to have some input with everyone else that you work with to figure out the best way to run your workplace. So y'all gotta talk things out. Nobody has unnecessary hierarchy over anyone else. And like through experience and time, you could have like more equity or more a little more authority and expertise within your industry as to provide some leadership towards other people. Now, I know a lot of people will disagree with me on that, but that's beside the point. So that's what socialism is. The idea is to democratize the workplace. Expand democracy to the workplace. Now, how do we do that? This is the... Well, okay, hold on. Do I have any other notes on socialism? Let's see. No, I don't. Okay, we're on track. So, how do we get to socialism? Because, honestly, that doesn't sound too bad, right? Like, okay, you work at McDonald's. Instead of being paid $10 an hour, you now get to decide with everyone what everyone should be paid, depending on how much profit or value you guys, or everyone is able to put together. So, instead of the McDonald's just being owned by whoever the current CEO is and then whatever shareholders, the people that actually work there get say and authority over what happens. Now, obviously, if you are a capitalist and you own capital, you are the CEO of McDonald's, this sounds like a horrible idea. Because you're like a quadrillion billionaire, right? You don't want to lose all your fucking money, right? Oh, fuck. You don't want to lose all your money. That's your capital. You invested in it. You took a risk, right? And it paid off. That's the whole point. So how do we get there? I'm going to talk about two different methods, although there's a lot of different ideologies, there's a lot of different discussions. I want to talk about the two main ones that are usually up for discussion. So there is revolution and there is reform. So, or revision. Revolution being what we're probably all more familiar with, being a seizure through force, a forceful seizure of property, and prosecution of existing capital owning class, right? Because under capitalism, you see all sorts of problems, right? Like, got fucking healthcare CEOs or healthcare agencies not like providing, or like denying claims to people for like life-saving treatment and shit like that, right? Or like being forced to live in a carb-dependent society that is very expensive, and just, you know, the overall unaffordability of everything, right? Capitalism is not very democratic, and it's also not very moral. It's not very ethical. So democratic socialism, or hold on, I'm getting ahead of myself. Revolutionary socialism, otherwise known as Marxist-Leninism. There's a few other offshoots, but that's kind of like the one that comes to mind, right? Marx kind of put together this idea that eventually this core class contradiction would be exacerbated so dramatically and so extremely that the proletariat would gain class consciousness and overthrow the bourgeoisie through the means of a violent revolution and establish socialism. That's what Marx said. Now, Vladimir Lenin, who was the founder of the USSR, he said, "Marx, your theory is too complicated. The average working person doesn't have time to learn all of this complicated political theory." Because, mind you, Marx has written a lot of fucking books, right? Lenin's like, you need a different strategy. And so what Lenin proposes is the idea of a vanguard party. And this vanguard is, the idea behind it is that it is a way to guide the overall revolutionary spirit of the masses with a group of dedicated professional revolutionaries. So in the context of Soviet Russia, or revolutionary Russia, in 1917, you would have the Bolsheviks, the Bolshevik Party. So they ended up establishing the USSR, which ended up being a one-party state. And they violently overthrew the existing Russian Tsar, who was responsible for a lot of like death, famine, lack of resources, lack of opportunity, like that sort of thing, right? So Lenin's like, you need a vanguard. You need a team of people that can do it because Marxism is just too complicated otherwise, and most people aren't going to bother to learn it, especially when they have to like provide for themselves and their families. And you get the Bolsheviks. Another example would be in China with Mao Zedong. Admittedly, I'm a little bit less versed in the history there, but Mao did follow a Marxist-Leninist sort of philosophy. Like, okay, let's get a vanguard party. Let's go through the motions, right? Let's get those trained elite revolutionaries who know the theory and are militant. That's the political theory. Another example, my favorite example, honestly, would be the guerrilla warfare that was led by Ernesto Che Guevara and Fidel Castro in the Cuban Revolution of 1959. So, man, these guys could all deserve their own episodes too. But basically, they ended up overthrowing the Batista regime in Cuba, and they established a communist party. They established a communist party in Cuba, which is still active to this day. China's communist party is also active to this day. So that would be Marxist-Leninism. That's the revolutionary way of achieving socialism. Oh my fuck, please fuck off. How did I miss that? Hello? Yes. Now, here's the thing. Revolution is not fun, right? It's bloody. People die. You gotta sacrifice your time, your labor, and there is no guarantee that it'll even work, right? Like, failed revolutions do happen, and that shit sucks. You know, you can't start a revolution and expect that you'll come out on the other end, right? Or that your friends or comrades, right? It's violent. This is not something that is particularly desirable. And this is kind of where you get into the idea of revisionism. So in the 1950s, I think, I could be wrong on this, a bunch of Marxist scholars were like, hey, you know how Marx said that the class contradictions within capitalism would get so bad that eventually the proletariat would overthrow? A lot of these Marxist scholars were like, you know, that's actually not happening, because over time, we got a lot more workers' protections, right? We went from the 12-hour workday to the 8-hour workday. We got the weekend. We got paid time off. Maternity leave. You know, fucking guaranteed breaks. You know, working conditions today are way better than what they used to be back then, right? There's no denying that. And so revisionists were like, maybe we don't need a revolution. Maybe, just maybe, we can achieve socialism through democratic means, through electoralism, through elections, campaigning, and the sort. You know, we can establish it through democracy. We can get everyone on board with this idea. And there are some pros and cons to this too. So, I think the most glaring one is that democratic socialism has never worked in theory. You know, like the Soviet Union and became a world superpower within a single lifetime, right? Like before that, it was feudal Russia, and they had no business doing anything anywhere. It was, yeah. And China now is like rivaling the United States in terms of like in its status of being a global superpower. You know, they're establishing industry like crazy. Democratic socialism has theoretically never worked. I think the closest example would be Salvador Allende in, I believe, Chile. Let me fact check that real quick. Salvador Salvador Allende. Yeah, former president of Chile. Um, who was a socialist president who got democratically elected. And this man ended up being assassinated through a United States-backed coup. Whether or not you think that's a failure of democratic socialism is up for debate, but ultimately nothing has really come out of democratic socialism in terms of like establishing a long form of socialism. Not realistically, at least. I think here's my perspective. Democratic socialism is more favorable, right? Like, you should not want to fight in a revolution. You know, the end goal, like Marxist-Leninism really is a ends justify the means methodology, whereas democratic socialism is more of a, you know, we can have a longer struggle over time if it means that, you know, like less people will get hurt. Well, Marxist-Leninists will tell you that people are getting hurt regardless, which is true. The third world is still getting exploited through unfair trade deals and the like. But that doesn't mean that everybody is suddenly ready to sign up to join the revolution and be part of the vanguard and learn all this theory and become an established form of militancy. It was like that though, for one group of people in the 60s, I believe. And that group of people in the United States was the Black Panther Party for self-defense. Oh, damn, they got my ass. Now, the Black Panther Party, they were a Marxist-Leninist group. They saw the systemic racism that exists in the United States and how much worse it was back then. And they figured, you know what? We can't trust cops to defend our black neighborhoods, our black communities, you know? So we're going to take up arms ourselves. We're going to learn theory, we're going to learn law, and we are going to practice open carry, develop mutual aid, and we're going to become more self-sustaining and, you know, advocate for more favorable conditions. We're going to advocate for more favorable conditions for the black community. So the Black Panther Party in American context is a good example, honestly the only example of a Marxist-Leninist group in the United States. A democratic socialist example would be that of Martin Luther King. Now he was a democratic socialist. This guy was like, there's this one quote of him that Zoran Mamdani loves to quote, which Zoran Mamdani, if you don't know, is the current mayor of New York City. And the quote, I'm forgetting it exactly, but it's something about how it goes, I'm gonna paraphrase it, but it goes, call it democratic socialism or something else, but there must be a more equal distribution of wealth within this country. Right. So capitalism's good at building wealth, socialism's good at distributing it. So according to Marxist theory, the idea is that you go through capitalism first, and then you establish socialism. You establish capitalism in order to build that wealth, and you then establish socialism so that you can distribute that wealth. That's the idea. Socialism's good at redistributing wealth. All these leaders and groups from the civil rights units, the civil rights movement, all had really good ideas about about American socialism, which historically has been incredibly unpopular, but is starting to change now. You know, Mamdani right now is incredibly popular, who's been implementing a lot of policies that are more egalitarian, that are more friendly to the average person, to the average worker. You know, universal child care for children up to the age of 2, like things like that. He's doing pretty good work for the most part. Now, here's something that people kind of talk about. If Mamdani is a socialist, then why isn't New York City a socialist city? The reason for that is that, quite simply, he is just the mayor. He doesn't have enough power to establish socialism within the city, especially not over the entire capital class that's living there, which is absurdly wealthy. When he was campaigning, he was advocating for this 2% tax on people who I don't remember the exact cutoff, but I think it was about $1 million or $2 million, something like that. So just a 2% tax, and that would be used to fund free and fast buses in New York City, so anybody could ride them. And the reason why it hasn't happened yet is quite simply because he's just the mayor. He doesn't have that power. He doesn't have that authority. Damn, that reef slider kind of got my ass. If you could establish a supermajority across American politics of democratic socialists, then yeah, we absolutely could establish socialism in the United States. But trying to do that, I feel like, would be very difficult. But at the same time, I don't think America's in the conditions for revolution yet. I think it is changing, though. You know, you're kind of starting to see a lot of political violence. Like, there's that one video of that warehouse guy who just who lit the toilet paper on fire, and it burned down the entire warehouse. Which, funnily enough, there were sprinklers that did not work. So what's that to say about the capitalist who got ineffective sprinklers? Oh fuck! Please die! Okay. Yeah. Socialism in general should be the goal, and I think it's worth also at this point it's worthy to talk about communism. So communism, as Friedrich Engels describes, who co-authored a lot of Marx's material. Oh my god, I'm about to get 1,000,000 points. Please, 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 please. Nice. Engels describes communism as the stage in which the proletariat is resolved of all class contradictions. Right? Okay, so that's a bunch of nonsense. What the fuck does that mean? Basically, what that means is once the working class is liberated and free and has ownership over their production, that is when communism exists. So you would have to abolish capitalism, and you would have to establish more equal forms of governing and ruling and all that. But it's usually described as a classless, stateless, moneyless society. And the idea behind that isn't that communists don't like money, or they don't like the government, right? Or that communists don't like class. It's that eventually, over time, as society begins to equal out inequalities, well, equals out inequalities, yeah. Eventually, certain things like class and money and government won't be needed, right? Like, let's say theoretically we get to a point of society where everyone gets paid the same. At that point, you don't really need money because everyone has the same amount. Everyone makes the same amount. So you wouldn't need money for that. So it's not about abolishing these things in order to achieve it. It's about materially resolving the need for these things to the point to where you establish a utopian communism, and that would be the final stage of socialism. Under the Marxist description, the point of socialism is to reach communism. That's the point. Socialism is meant to be resolving class antagonisms and contradictions in order to achieve communism, which I have no idea how long that would take to do theoretically. Like, let's say socialism got established in the United States, like right now. It would probably take a couple hundred years, because you would have to go through the dialectic struggle of changing people's minds. Right? You still have people who believe in capitalism, and you'd have to get rid of that through in order to establish communism. But that also sounds kind of contradictory, because if communism is when there's no government, then China has a communist party, then does that mean that China's communist? Because it doesn't sound like it. Well, yes and no. So in that answer, I said that China is under control by a communist party, right? Communists themselves are people that believe in trying to achieve communism. The methods differ, but that is what a communist is. Now, China as a society, the way it exists right now, is not in communism. It's not a communist society. They are what we would call state capitalism, which is a whole nother discussion for another time. But no, they still have private ownership. They still have money. They still have a government, obviously, right? But it's something that they are trying to actively transition towards. Communism is simply the end goal, and parties are people who try to make it happen. So even in Cuba, there's still a government, there's still class, there's still money, there's still class antagonisms, there's still class contradictions. Cuba is not at the stage of communism, but it's under communist rule, which means that they're trying to get there. That's all that means. It's nothing more complicated than that. So when people are talking about how China is not really communist, I mean, yeah, this is true. China isn't communist. They're not the highest stage of communism where all class contradictions have been resolved. They haven't achieved that. Oh my god, he really got me. But they're under the rule of a communist party that is trying to reach communism, right? Communism is this, the way that I personally like to describe it is that it's the most utopian society that could theoretically be possible within real life. Think of Star Trek, right? In Star Trek, I believe they have this technology that allows them to that allows them to duplicate whatever materials that they have, right? So at that point, they're not really fighting over resources anymore. They can kind of just have unlimited of whatever they want. And, you know, labor becomes not an obligation, but a privilege, you know? Like, oh, I get to travel the cosmos. I don't have to do it for money. I can just do it for science, for learning, you know? Conservatives have a negative outlook on human nature. Liberals have a positive outlook on human nature. Socialists have a neutral outlook on human nature. The socialist perspective, which is the one that I share, is that human nature is neither inherently good or bad, but is rather vulnerable to either, dependent on the material conditions that present themselves in the environment. What that basically means is basically anybody is capable of doing anything as long as you present them with the right conditions. You know, you got this person who's only ever known violence, they're probably going to be a violent person, which would make them capable of doing bad things. On the other hand, you have someone who's only ever been exposed to like positivity and good things, who's never even heard of the concept of violence, wouldn't even be able to do violence because they wouldn't even know what it is. That's the argument. And it involves taking a material analysis, right? You have to look at the physical things that people interact with that change their state of being in order to understand how they operate. So the socialist idea is that, oh my god, that's the worst bubble ever. Oh, go away! The socialist idea is that we need to establish a society that conditions people into being good people rather than rewarding their greed. Socialists believe that capitalism encourages people to be greedy and to fend for themselves, but not that greed is inherent to human nature. If you're a CEO, like look at the Lorax. Let's look at the Lorax, right? The Onceler is a capitalist who owns Thneeds, right? And all the Thneed factories and production, right? And trades a wager for the labor of his employees at the factories, right? It is in his interest to then chop down the entire forest of truffula trees for the profit, right? That's in his interest. That's greedy. That is greedy. But, you know, that was because of his material conditions. He was encouraged to do that by the system that he was in. Imagine if it wasn't a system of private ownership, but instead of democratic means of process, where it wasn't just him who making all the decisions, but rather everyone that worked there. Maybe you have some people that value trees, people that don't want to destroy the forest. And you could also get some government regulation, which would involve the rest of the community to be involved with this decision-making process. Oh my god, there's no way they're gonna let me do this. They really just let me do that. You know, so under socialism, everybody gets to have a say. And I think it's worth mentioning that socialism does take form in a few different steps, right? You have state capitalism, and a few other things. Now, the steps of socialism are a little bit beyond the scope of what I currently know, but I would not mind looking at that for a future episode. Oh my crud. But yeah, so that's basically the... Oh, okay, hold on, there's this part I skipped. Okay. Conservatives and libertarians tend to vote Republican. Oh, fuck. Hold on. Oh, I got... Shit. Fuck. We're gonna... I really hope they don't fucking get the lead back here. I swear to God. I really... What if my push is what ends up deciding, like, whether or not we win? Oh my god. Stop. Oh, no way! Oh, this Hydra better fucking... Oh, no. Please! Oh my god, my push is the reason that we won. Let's go. Okay, so conservatives and libertarians tend to vote Republican. Progressive liberals vote Democrat. Socialists vote for fucking whatever they can. In the United States, there isn't truly like a left-wing party. The Democratic Party is still a there's still a liberal party, and liberalism is a right-wing ideology that represents capitalism, right? Capitalism being right-wing. Left-wing would be socialism. Leftism is commonly understood to just be leftism is commonly understood to start at being anti-capitalist, and then with that there's a lot of different possibilities. Personally, I know a lot of socialists tend to vote Democrat regardless, but there are a few that vote third party. Well, one party that comes to mind is the Peace and Freedom Party in California. They have a socialist candidate running for governor's office named Ramsey Robinson. Check out his campaign, he's cool. But generally, socialists still end up voting Democrat, even though a lot of us don't like to do it. But yeah, thank you for watching, and I'm gonna chill out now. That was fun. I'll have to figure out what to do for next time. Later.